Okay, thanks very much for joining. Really appreciate your time. We've had nearly 300 people register, so that's a great start for the first in our series of webinars on the executive search industry. And particularly as we've just done a survey on LinkedIn, you may have seen it, saying that more than half of you feel that there's going to be an uplift for the second half of 2024. We're just closing the first half, as you know, so you're going to be even busier. So your time is even more appreciated. So please do complete the survey. Just a quick voting poll on LinkedIn if you haven't already. So this webinar is going to be just under 60 minutes. It's going to be myself and my two strategic partners, two of our strategic partners, I should say. Steffi Gande, who's going to be talking about marketing, and Ellis, who's going to be talking about valuations and exit plans. If you want to send any questions, they won't be seen by anybody else in the chat, but they'll be gathered. We won't necessarily have time to address them during the course of the session, I'm afraid, because we're going to be skimming through quite a lot of subjects. The idea is that we cover a lot of subjects, and then we consult with you and we hear from you afterwards to see what you'd like to cover in more depth for future webinars. So that's the idea. So we're going to put my email address in the chat, and also Philip's email address in the chat. So if you've got specific questions to do with M&A or exit planning or valuations that you want to send privately, then you can send them obviously to Philip. Anything else you can send to me, and anything to do with marketing specifically, send to me and I'll forward to Steffi. So I'm going to be talking about trends in the industry and a few subjects I'm going to go through, including fee levels, which are changing quite a lot, and flexibility on fees, and also compensation for partners. And I also intend to get through quite a few sort of industry trends. And then Steffi is going to be talking about marketing, which is going to be about strategy, but also about some quick wins that you can get done. And Philip's going to be talking about valuations and exit planning. So just quickly, why are we doing this? Well, we've had lots of meetings recently in Europe and London. And we are getting asked more and more the same sorts of questions, really. But you know, a lot of the questions that have come up are: how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we put together some succession planning, exit planning? Get questions about technology, AI. So we're therefore producing a series of webinars. And we're also going to be forming a CEO club. So that will be in person in London. We might try and do that in Europe as well, some in-person events, some roundtable events for CEOs of search firms. And we'll also be doing some online as well. So please let us know, after this, if that would be of interest, because we're only going to be doing it if we get enough interest, but hopefully we will. So that will be, sharing in sort of a confidential environment, various issues, and being able to give each other advice and help on various topics. So just quickly to introduce myself, and then I'll introduce Steffi to talk about marketing. We are ALC Enable. 90% of what we do is outside the UK. Predominantly the US and Europe, but we've worked in Asia, Australia, 36 countries. There are hundreds of executive search firm owners and CEOs we meet every year. And we've been doing this for 23 years. So when I say this, we've been consulting executive search firms on strategy and also on growth. There's eight people in our team, and we've got 12 strategic partners, including Steffi and Philip. And besides M&A and marketing, we've got strategic partners who cover AI, technology, strategy. And then we also have over 400 freelancers, freelance researchers. So they do research for us, but we also have a talent pool of freelance researchers that we can hire out to yourselves as well, as a sort of top-up service, because it's quite hard to gauge busyness these days. It can fluctuate, as we know. So just to give you a quick examples of our work, we've worked for the Shreks, all of the Shreks, including Egon Zehnder, mid-sized firms, but most of our work is for mid-sized firms and smaller firms. We've worked on corporate identity, helping firms with their identity, their values, their culture, their marketing strategy, their efficiency, processes, structure, research function, succession planning, M&A. So it's everything really to do with an executive search business. And we've also mentored and coached executive search leaders, helping with fee models, how partners should be compensated, streamlining research and delivery, and helping with culture as well, which is becoming increasingly important to define your culture. We hire also for search firms, so talent acquisition at all levels, predominantly partner, managing partner level, but also at researcher delivery level. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got a freelance talent pool of researchers. Please do fire some questions on the chat. We're going to record them all, and we will get back to you, or we're going to do a follow-up email. So any sort of general questions, Q&A, we won't identify you unless you want us to identify you. But we're going to send a follow-up email, which will include the questions, the general questions that we've had, and the answers. And then any specific ones, as I said, send email to me. For anything confidential, email to me, or if it's to do with M&A or exit planning, to Philip. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to Steffi, who's our strategic partner for marketing, and I will let you introduce yourself, Steffi, and yeah, and again, thanks very much for joining. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Good evening. It's great to have so many people here. So when we talk about branding and marketing, it's inevitable that some of you may well be very familiar with some of the concepts we're about to explore today. But whatever the current maturity of your activities, I hope you'll find some inspiring ideas in the next 15 minutes to take it to the next step. So let's get moving. First of all, it would be good if my slides would advance. There we go. So we're going to kick off with a little look at the market that we're operating in, some structure and some trends. So first of all, it is a growing global market. It's over tripled in size over the last 10 years to in and around 35 billion now. So not surprisingly, it's attractive, it's fiercely competitive, and there's some domination going on with the top global 40 running nearly 14,000 consultants around the world in over 2,600 offices. And I'm sure you'll be very aware of who they are and where they are. So how is the confidence? I mean, Tim mentioned good confidence for the second half of the year, and overall around 72%, according to Hunt Scanlon, anticipate meeting their revenue goals this year. But what this suggests really is that the rest are not quite so sure. So the question is, how can we raise your marketing and branding to make sure that you move into that 72%? And if you're in that 72%, to make sure that you really do meet your goals. Now, the market is also consolidating and expanding. It was revealed that around 6 out of 10 firms are considering a merger or an acquisition over the next 12 months or 5 years. 33% are looking at that in the next few months. And in around the same number are thinking of hiring new partners or consultants in the next 12 months. So that's just a sort of little snapshot of what the market is looking like. It'd be interesting to see whether you recognize any of that. But this is, of course, where systematic branding and marketing can really set your firm apart. Now, it's very understandable that in the day-to-day pressure of winning and delivering on assignments, marketing can feel a bit like an iceberg. It's difficult to define and it's difficult to break down into its components. So no wonder so many firms tend to put it on one side. So my job today is to start to deconstruct this iceberg, as Tim mentioned, so you can start to prioritize and get some quick wins under your belt if you so choose. So I think it's good to start off in this rather vague and fuzzy place. Say, what are the definitions, I think? So the first thing is to say, what is a brand? Capfra is a highly reputed French marketing professor that talks about it in these terms. I won't read it out for you, you can all read. But what I'd like you to remain with is the notion of it being an idea. It's a promise that is sustained in reality. And how will you recognize a good brand? Well, it's unique, or it's distinctive, it's strong, it's salient, and most importantly, it's positive, it's desirable. We all know some brands that may have those first two qualities, but maybe not so much the last one. So much for branding. Or what's a market? What is marketing then? Oh, and by the way, before we even go there, it's a strategic capital asset. If we're talking about mergers and acquisitions, think about brand equity. Now, marketing. The best definition I've found is this. And I like the fact that it's beyond just communicating. It's also about creating, delivering, and exchanging. And it's beyond customers and clients. It's also about society at large. So there's this notion of sustainability in this definition from the American Marketing Association. So the question then is, how do all these things connect up? And here we come back to Mr. Capfra with his pyramid. So you can see branding and marketing as a pyramid, and right at the top, it's driven by your vision and your purpose. Why are you in business in the first place? What makes you special and motivated? We then move down into your values. So these are 5 or 6 anchor points that guide your decisions and actions. And these, what you broadcast outside, can be the same as your internal values. We then move down into your benefits and your attributes. These are characteristics of your firm and its offer that are to the advantage of the clients. And also, should you have it or are interested in developing it, intellectual property, so consulting or executive search markets that you've developed yourselves. We then move right down into the part that, I think it's fair to say most people would think this is what marketing is. Exclusively what marketing is. It's what people see in terms of your look and feel, your visual and verbal identity, and your communications, your messaging, and the way that these are expressed. And then finally, what's missing? Well, your service lines. This is often what people see first. So they move through your service lines upwards into these higher order attributes. Now, your highest order attribute is your vision and purpose, and this is expressed as a slogan if you choose to have a slogan. What I want to emphasize here, and what Capfra emphasizes, is that managing your brand starts top down. You move through these various levels to reach the front lines. So that's what he says. You may have another idea, which is also fun, but I like this one. So let's get real. I would like to invite you to perform a health check after this at some point. It's convenient for you as a team, as individuals. What are the 4 signs of impactful marketing? How will you recognize that it's doing well? Well, first of all, it's driven by the capstone of that pyramid. It's driven by a brand that is known because it's unique and it's strong and it's positive. The touch points that people encounter when they meet you are going to be professional and consistent. So whether it's your website, whether it's your PowerPoints, whether it's your candidate reports, they are recognizably you. You will have a communication cycle in place that is consistent and it's measurable. And we'll see in a moment that there are many free things here that will enable you to measure what's going on. Even if you're only doing a few actions, think about them in advance and make them consistent, is all. And also, marketing is not seen as something you'll do tomorrow. It's not seen as something you'll get around to. It's something that's seen as a core business hygiene. So first of all, here's an interesting task for those of you who haven't already done it, is to audit those touch points. And I've, put some of them up here for you. Imagine that this is an executive search firm who's performed this exercise. So first of all, the firm looks at its promotional materials and its platforms, for example, its website, its brochures, and its LinkedIn profiles. And in this instance, they're not saying what they want about the brand and they're not terribly consistent, which is a very common issue. These things tend to grow organically. I think that's the problem, isn't it? When it's very natural. Looking at the people, this is the real brand ambassadors, and they're doing pretty well there. These are the people we want. Right. Business development materials, the PowerPoints, and so every single consultant in the firm is doing something different. So there could be some work to be done there. When you look at the environment, typically firms have a beautiful office. You've got the modern art on the wall. You've got the leather sofas. You may be in an inner city central location. So that may be looking good too. But then what about your delivery materials, your candidate reports and so on? How are they looking? So I really invite you to sit as a team, or if you're just running on your own, have a meeting with yourself and have a look at these things. So let's get down to business. There are, I would say, 6 marketing tasks for an executive search firm. I won't read them out for you now because we're going to plunge in. So first of all, there is the why. Why are you bothering to do any marketing at all? This is your strategic purpose. Now, I'd say there are 4 main things you might like to achieve here. Concretely, is targeting, so identifying and understanding your audience, attracting, build awareness and generate leads, winning, acquiring new clients and assignments, and then getting those clients to do more with you. Building deeper and longer relationships. So I think, it's a question of where you might like to start with this. You may want to do all 4 or a couple of them, but really what would make you break out the champagne in a year's time? Let's break this down even further. We've looked at the brand architecture, not going to do that again, but what I would like to do is just take a very, very brief visit to this, which is your service lines. As we all know, many executive search firms are branching out into extensions of the brand, new service lines. And having spent several years swimming in these problems, I would say there are 4 questions I would very humbly invite you to ask yourselves. First of all, when you look at your existing brand, it may be a baby brand, it may be an established brand, but how stretch resistant is it? Is adding more to that brand going to be something the brand can tolerate, or is it going to confuse, fragment, and start to dissolve what you've already got? The second question is, if you, for example, you decide you want to go into consulting services, what legitimacy do you have in that line, or could you quickly acquire? Remembering that a brand is a promise that needs to be sustained. Now, if you're bringing in a new service line, such as interim management and bringing in another firm, are those brands compatible with each other? And indeed, will they add value to each other? Or will you end up with problem 1, where you're eroding your brand by adding more bits to it? And then finally, the hard question, what resources do you actually have to market and deliver that new line? I think, you will receive this afterwards, I believe, so you can sort of address this with a good coffee or something stronger if you choose to. I'd like now to look down into another incredibly important part of marketing, is who you're dealing with, who your audiences are, the segmentation model. Mostly executive search firms are very concerned, and understandably, with clients However, how many of you address your candidates in your marketing activities? And indeed, when we think about the number of firms that are looking for a merger or acquisition, so 6 out of 10, or to bring in new partners, you may want to be looking at these other segments too. And let's also remember that at the moment, candidates are getting increasingly difficult to detach from their existing firms. And there are likely a considerable number of consultants working in your market from top global brands. So if you can think of some arguments to attract these people, you are already moving into those firms that are confident about the future. So unpack those, I would invite you to do. Concretely, there's a nice exercise you can do. You can actually map your client base. So I've used the example of an executive search firm whose main concentration of clients is at regional level, with a workforce of between 1,000 and 500. Now, even if you only have 3 or 4 clients, that's okay. The question is, where do you want to play? What segment could bring you in the most business? Where are you best positioned to bring in the business? And then that's going to actually work out in the way you message, the way you talk to your audience, and the way you spend your marketing budget, should you have any marketing budget. So these are important questions, and you can do similar grids for firm type, you can do similar grids for sectors. So it's a question of where you're going to focus your efforts. Having defined your segments, you then need to work out what you're going to say to them. And that's going to be based on 3 things: their challenge, your proposition, ideally as unique as it can be, and what benefit they're going to get from working with you. And then we're going back to that big blue brand pyramid. Now, none of this is going to happen without some people, even if there's only one of you. Who is going to do this? How are you going to build a marketing movement? I've taken the example of a global firm, but you can also look at this as a national or regional firm. The most important point I want to stress is that it needs to be driven by senior people. It is not just an operational or administrative exercise, even though there are operations and even though there's lots of admin potentially. Please make sure that somebody who knows the business is driving your marketing. And then if you are international or multi-offices, do make sure that you also have a local forum, really from the front lines, and that these 2 forums are feeding into each other and cross-fertilizing ideas. There's nothing worse than coming up with a great marketing strategy from the center that doesn't make any sense in your offices. So this has to be a cross-fertilized process. Now, very important thing now, and we're moving fast into actually creating some content. As an executive search firm, what are you selling? It's expertise, it's insights, it's know-how, and demonstrating and sharing that is critical to brand building. Now, this is what we could call content marketing. So it's thought leadership, it's articles, and so on. And nearly 9 out of 10 B2B specialists say they created brand awareness in this way this year. This is from the Content Marketing Institute. And more pointedly, this is how many say they generated leads from those activities. And I can back that up. It is true. However, how do we now break down this next iceberg to say what kind of content are we talking about? So I've kind of looked at a taxonomy for you. So here are some various things you can be doing. Now, if we look at case studies, when we look at a brand experience, these are a beautiful way to showcase what people are saying about your brand, the testimonials, which should also be on your website as well, by the way. But I really want to mention quantitative studies. Yes, they do take a little bit of work, but they work. 30% last year of B2B marketers said they used quantitative studies and they were effective. This year it's 43%. There's something up in there, so do think about that. What forms could you be looking at? You've got various options. The question is to really test what's working for you and adjust as necessary. If we get to talk together, we can talk about the ones that I would recommend. So here are all your editorial forms again. and they're distributed around this circle. This is an ecosystem showing how your editorial forms and your communications channels all connect up. First communication channel, that's most important, is of course your website. This is your hub into which everything feeds. People often ask about social media. Should we be on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok? Oh my God. You know what I recommend is this one, to be frank with you, and I'm not the only one. 84% of content marketers prioritize LinkedIn. They say that this is the most effective and value delivering channel. And you can also leverage your LinkedIn content on X and Twitter. But how is Facebook doing, by the way? Well, only 26% said that that was the most effective channel. And that was the next best. So LinkedIn 84, next comes Facebook at 29%. Sorry. So again, a quick thing about quantitative studies. Fantastic channel to get your message out there. Objective, widespread coverage to business audience is the press. What helps you get into the press, in my experience, it's that quantitative study. So if you have the courage, then I would really recommend embarking on one of those. Get some facts and figures out there and your insights to add to those. In-person events are quicker, easier, and very effective way of getting in front of your audience. And you can also get articles out of your events. What is said, you can then publish thought leadership on. And really, when you're planning your activities, think about the connectivity between all of these things. Make some choices and try to choose things that you can leverage in multiple formats as well. It's fun. It's fun. Just takes a bit of thought. Now, nearly there. You make me relieved to know. It was always said, I know half my advertising works, I just don't know which half. And now, thanks to LinkedIn, you can. By the way, of course you can advertise. However, what I've been focusing on here are things that don't cost you money. What does not cost you money is LinkedIn. What costs the money, if there is any money, is devising that content to go on there. But the good thing about LinkedIn is, of course, you can measure what's happening in real time. And Google Analytics also offers you the opportunity to measure the content, the quality and volume of your web traffic. So this was what we say in English, a whistle-stop tour. It was very fast. I hope I didn't talk too fast. But to wrap up, I really want to put a positive message out there. And your firm very likely has what it takes. You've got significant knowledge, and you've probably got a culture that is conducive to marketing and content creation. You'll be sending your questions if you have any. We'll do our best to answer them. And indeed, if you'd like a more one-on-one meeting, then please go ahead and contact Tim. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks so much, Steffi. That was great. And yes, so just contact me if you have got any questions about marketing for us or for Steffi, and we can arrange for you to meet up with her. No problem at all. And just to say, the slides will be sent by us. We'll be sending a follow-up early next week when we've compiled other questions and put some answers down for you, and sending those slides as well. So I'm now going to introduce Philip Ellis, who's our strategic partner for M&A and succession planning and exit strategy. So I will hand over to Philip, and then I'll come back at the end and talk about a few industry trends and a couple of other topics. Thanks, Philip.
Thanks, Tim, and hi everybody. And thanks to Steffi. That was fascinating. An awful lot of content packed in there. I'm sure you all found it very interesting. Going to move to a different area now altogether to talk to you a little bit about valuations and exit strategies. Bit of background first. So I run Optima. We are an investment banking advisory firm. Our core focus is advising on acquisitions and sales. And the thing to mention of most import, I think, is that we work exclusively in the human capital sector. So my first deal in the human capital sector was 28 years ago. For the last 18 years, I've worked exclusively in this market. So within human capital, we define that as being recruitment businesses, executive search firms, support services into the sector, and increasingly HR tech and the future of work as well. So if it's anything to do with human capital space, we're interested. We think we have a lot of knowledge and experience. If it's outside of that, there will be other people that will know more, and we'll happily leave them to advise on those transactions. We work in the lower and mid markets, so typically transactions anywhere between 2 and 50 million of value. And whilst we're based in the UK, we've done a lot of international and cross-border work and transactions as well. So that's a little bit about us, just to give you sense of a couple of things we're working on at the moment. So we are in the due diligence phase on the sale of an executive search business, which is joining a consolidator. It's a partial exit, so the owners are remaining involved and retaining some equity. And we're also advising a firm which started life as an executive search firm, has pivoted more into consulting now, and they are looking to join a larger firm, and we're in discussions to join a larger firm to leverage what they have and to scale it more effectively as well. So just to give you a brief flavour of some of the things we're involved with. So firstly, let's look at the question of valuation, something on everyone's minds, and just picking up on one of Steffi's slides where she said that 6 out of 10 firms are considering M&A. There's a good chance, of course, that all of you who've joined this webinar may have M&A on your minds, but by my reckoning, that means there's about 75 of you that I should be expecting to hear from in the next 12 months, which is good. So that should keep me busy. And really, the first question that everybody wants to understand and think about is valuation. It's a complex and detailed area, and of course, in a few minutes, can't possibly cover everything. But I just want to give you some high-level pointers and guidance on how valuation works in this part of the market. So really, there are 2 approaches which can be taken. One is a multiple of revenue, and the other is a multiple of EBITDA. So for EBITDA, think profit for now. That would be a webinar on its own to explain how EBITDA is calculated, but let's just call it profit for now. I'll talk about that a little more in a moment. So in terms of revenue, as a professional services firm, an executive search business may often be looked at in terms of the revenue which it's generating. The thing that we do need to be mindful of is how that interplays with profitability. So quite often, when the valuation exercise is being undertaken, it'll be looking at a combination of turnover and profitability to make sure that turnover isn't being generated in a non-profitable way. So lots of consultants, lots of billing partners, but maybe not generating that much revenue per head, which would skew how profitable the business is. And also, if a firm is exceptionally profitable because of 1 or 2 superstar billers, again, that in itself might skew valuation if we looked only at profitability. So it's usually a combination of the 2 which is considered. How is the right multiple determined? Well, there are lots of factors which go into that. Let's call them risk factors for the moment. Each business is different, and there's no simple rule. There's no book you can look in to find the answer. It's a matter of judgment and assessing each business on its own merits and features. But some of the things which really can have an impact, and again, there's a long list, but I'm just going to pick out a few for today's purposes. Firstly, how much reliance is there on the owners? And of course, this is particularly pertinent for executive search firms. So if you're a smaller firm and you, the founder, are still responsible for a large proportion of the revenue generation, or at least securing the mandates, which you may then hand across to the team. The question for the buyer is, if you're leaving the business, if your intention is to sell and exit, what's left afterwards? Will those clients continue to work with the firm, or is that relationship with you as an individual? So it's a really important thing to think about. If you have an exit in mind, everything you can do to transfer those relationships and make sure that it's the business which has the value and not you, the individual, will be very helpful and beneficial to value. The size of the business also matters. So a 5-person business is perceived as quite risky by a buyer, because if 1 or 2 were to leave, it will leave a big hole. A 50-person business where 1 or 2 leave, of course, has much less impact. And a 500-person business, it would hardly be noticed, and it probably happens every week. So the size of the business does make a difference. That's not me saying to you, if you're a small business, you need to go and scale to 500 before you can think about selling. It's just recognizing that the valuation metrics of those 2 businesses would be different. And the final one I'm going to mention today is the nature of the revenue. So if it's all high value executive search, and as we all know, that can be lumpy, a little bit inconsistent, and so in inverted commas, a bit risky. Firms which are diversifying, and again, Steffi mentioned this quite rightly, firms which are diversifying into consulting, assessment, all sorts of other revenue streams and interim, which might smooth out the nature of that revenue and make it a bit more sticky and consistent. That also is beneficial. So that can help to drive value as well. So again, something certainly to think about. So having given you some words about valuation, I'm sure you may be itching to get some guidance in financial terms. So let me try and give you some guidelines, and these are quite broad for the reasons I've spoken about. Valuations can vary quite widely, but in terms of revenue, you should think about valuation typically being in the 0.75 to 1.5 times revenue range. Now, you'll always find outliers and examples of businesses that sit outside of those parameters, but I think probably for the majority of small or medium-sized businesses, that 0.75 to 1.5 times revenue range is not unreasonable. And in terms of profitability, the range as a multiple of profits is likely to be 3 to 7 times. I appreciate that's a very wide range for the reasons you now understand. Only one other thing I want to say about profits. It's important to recognize that depending on the structure of your business, in calculating profit for valuation purposes, that needs to take account of remuneration for owners. So if, for example, you take your remuneration out in the form of dividends, or if for any particular reason you choose not to take any remuneration in a given year because you don't need to, or you take significantly higher than usual remuneration, that doesn't really affect the value. It's a normal level, normalized level of remuneration which should be looked at. That's a very complex topic, which again can't cover in the short time available now, but just as a guiding principle, make sure that if you're thinking about profitability, you've got some recognition of revenue in there. Let me now turn to the second topic, exit routes. So what are the possible routes available for an owner wishing to exit? And I'm looking at this from the perspective of someone looking to exit rather than acquirers. So is private equity likely to buy your business? Probably not. There are examples of private equity owned businesses, as you all know, and they're typically pretty large businesses. ZRG springs to mind, and you may have seen recently that they raised further $120 million to continue on their acquisition spree. And Kingsley Gate, and I think I saw that name pop up in the chat before, also have raised finance and are backed and are making acquisitions. But for the average small or medium-sized executive search firm, private equity doesn't really like the profile of the high value, low volume type income. So that's probably not something to consider. I would say that would be the exception rather than the rule. It's more likely to think about a trade sale. So selling the business to an external business, let's call it a competitor or a peer in the market. The other route to consider is transferring ownership to the existing team. So quickly, let me just touch on a couple of options there. A trade sale. Why would another firm be interested in acquiring you? I've broken it into four key areas, I would say. Either entry into a new market. If your business is complementary with their existing market, so you may have a different part of the market, you may have complementary customers that they think would be additive in terms of value, so that might be an attraction. It may be somebody that operates in the same markets as you do, but in a different geography. So an acquirer moving into a new market, so extending their footprint, but continuing to operate within the same vertical market or markets. Or finally, the addition of new services. So if you're heavily weighted towards consulting, board assessments, whatever it may be, or interim, it may be that a firm which is only delivering search at this stage sees it as an important strategic move to add those services, and so they therefore may consider acquiring you. Conscious of time, so the final thing to touch on very briefly, if your preferred route or the most likely route is transferring ownership of your business internally to your existing team, what are the options? Well, a management buyout is one. Using options or growth shares or other forms of equity instruments to transfer ownership over a period of time to senior members of your team could be considered. There's also an option in the UK, something called an Employee Ownership Trust, EOT, which again, similar sort of category, could be considered. Or perhaps it's just staged payments, so the management team over a period of time either sacrifice some commission, raise some finance personally, whatever shape or form that might take to buy equity from you, the owners. Each of those areas is quite complex, but hopefully this has given you a little bit of insight into the key areas of valuation and possible exit routes. And as Tim has already said, I will be happy to try and answer any questions which you wish to submit. So thank you for your attention. Hope that's been helpful, and I'll hand you back to Tim.
Thanks so much, Philip. You packed a lot in there, so I really appreciate that. And thanks again to Steffi too. I'm going to pack a lot in. I'll try not to go too fast, but I'm just going to skim the surface of a few topics, and forgive me if I go too fast, and we can always come back and speak to you on a one-to-one, but also please do pop your questions in the chat, and we will come back to you early next week with some answers to those questions. And again, if they're sensitive or specific to you, then just email us and we can do that. So just quickly on fee structures is a trend. Lots of things happening to the executive search industry over the last 5 years, more than ever before. I would put that down to two things primarily. One is COVID has accelerated change. I'll go into that a bit more later. And the other is the rise of in-house executive search. But fee structure has definitely been changing dramatically over the last 5 years. What I'm quoting for now is, although we work globally, the audience here today is European. I include the UK in that for this purpose. So more than 60% of executive search firms now charge flat fees regularly or always. And I think that's about getting more trust from the client, just charging a flat fee rather than a percentage. When there is a percentage, the percentage has flexed slightly downwards, I would say, over the last 5 years, as there's been a gain to compete with in-house. There's been more of a sort of sense of urgency and being agile, and speed has been more and more important. As well as quality first, of course, but speed has definitely become more important. And that's so in Western Europe, the percentage range has typically been between 25 and 30% now. There are countries such as Germany that will go over that, and sometimes certain industries and countries will go under that. And then in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, the figures can be slightly lower. Retainers, in terms of the third model, that's pretty much obsolete, except for the larger firms. Some smaller firms and mid-sized firms still do that, which is great. But a lot of firms are sort of flexing on that now and charging lower retainers, and sometimes even the second stage fees are missed. So it's just a retainer and payment on signature. There's also an interesting trend for search firms. This is quite relatively new, I'd say, but search firms offering a second tier service, which is more targeted, using technology, more sort of targeting people through social media service and advertising. So sort of targeted advertising as a sort of second tier, lower charge service. And then the final trend I will mention is subscription. So seeing that probably about 10% of executive search firms that we speak to, and we speak to hundreds every year, are charging a monthly or quarterly subscription service where they're providing executive search services and sometimes some additional business intelligence services as part of that package. Just moving on to compensation for partners and how do you pay people? We get asked this all the time. Are we paying at a competitive rate? Well, yeah, it's difficult to say because there's a wide range, and obviously bonus plans and equity and employee benefits also will skew the base salary that you need to offer. I'd say in Western Europe, the Shreks are paying between 150 and 300,000. I'm quoting pounds and euros. It's more or less the same, depending on where you are. So 150 to 300,000 base salaries. Mid-sized and smaller firms, 100 to 200,000. And then some countries, for example, Germany, again, don't pay a base salary necessarily. There's probably about 20% of firms in Germany that don't pay a base salary, but you're kind of operating in a sort of franchise type model where you're taking the lion's share of the revenue, typically between sort of 60 and 80%. So I get asked about overall earnings. What do we have to pay out? Because base salaries vary so much within search firms, it's worth looking at what do you pay overall, because that's the figure that matters in terms of bonus and base salary altogether. So based on the revenue that the partner's producing. So for a Shrek firm, it's typically between 30 and 40% of the overall revenue that they receive in their pockets, base salary and bonus altogether. Mid-sized firms, 45% to 65%. I'd define a mid-sized firm as anything between sort of 20 people and 100 people. And then a smaller firm, so a firm less than 20 people, 60 to 75% a partner would expect to receive. The bonuses, again, have been changing a lot over the last 5 years. Every search firm owner I talk to talks about their collaborative culture versus the rest of the industry. So hopefully that means everyone is becoming collaborative. And something that really encourages that, of course, is creating a team or business bonus as part of the. So a kind of frequent model is that 50% of the bonus is based on individual performance or revenue, and 50% is based on team or company performance, or at least an element of company or team performance, which is often paid, or profit, which is often paid at the end of the year. I do think personally that's a good model to encourage that sort of collaboration, which I think is becoming more and more important. Equity schemes and equity are becoming more important as a way of retaining people, and because I'd say more than 60-70% of search firms in Europe offer equity plans or equity, then it's becoming more and more important that you do too, if you want to grow and if you want to tempt partners away from other firms. It's becoming something that partners or potential employees are looking at. Employee benefits have been moving along steadily in terms of improving. It used to be just bonus and base salary. Now there are, even for small firms, less than 20 people, I'm seeing more private healthcare and pension contributions. But it's the bonus element and the overall earnings that are clearly the driving forces for these money-minded partners. But please do ask if you need any advice on researchers and delivery consultants, associates, principals. But I don't have time to sort of cover that now. Just quickly going to just cover some trends that we're seeing, and forgive me again for skimming through these, but you feel free to ask about these in more detail after the session, or reach out and we can have a one-to-one. So again, since COVID, we've seen firms and individuals kind of planning longer term. I think COVID has meant that people have been more reflective about their lives generally, and have been looking at longer term, which is great for the industry and great for retention. I think that's probably true of every industry, but I think the executive search industry has come from a long way behind the industries that you serve. And I know, ironically, retention's been pretty bad in the past, but I think that's improving. There's been some cultural improvements because of, again, I think during the pandemic, firms had to look at the working from home versus working in the office policy, and that's kind of forced them in a positive way to look at culture in the round. So firms are now defining their culture, and they're realizing that actually people are less ready to move from one firm to another. So a kind of really clear, defined culture with values, mission, vision really, really matters. The rise of in-house, I've talked about before, but when I say in-house, I mean in-house executive search has been massive over the last 5 years. That, interestingly, hasn't impacted on the size of the executive search industry. So you guys must be doing something right, which is fantastic. But I think what that has meant, the rise of in-house has meant that executive search firms have got smarter, have had to get smarter, offering other services, non-search services. And because there's been smarter competition, you yourselves have got to, with your individual firm, have also got to sort of rise to that. Firms have become, this has been for the last 10 years probably, search firms have had to become more global in response to catering for global corporates that they're serving, again, competing against the in-house side of things. So global as well as local has been increasingly important. Adding additional advisory services, assessment, interim, mergers and acquisitions, business intelligence, board consulting. I think about 85% of search firms now have at least 5% revenue coming from at least one of those other services. And there's about 10% of firms have revenue coming from, so 10% of firms have at least 30% of revenue coming from one of those services besides executive search. So there's been more consolidation, as Steffi and Philip also spoke about. Size is more important than it used to be. I would say capacity, as the competition increases, improved branding, differentiation, positioning has become more important. It's very difficult to differentiate your search firm, but it is possible. Sharper business strategy, better retention, as I touched on before. Technology has become more streamlined, and better with AI being introduced. Networks have become stronger, so the growth of international networks, you'll know some of them. Amrop and Boyden are the most famous, but there's actually 48 global networks of executive search firms in the world, and each of those 48, almost all of those have more than 40 members around the world. So those have been growing, and some of them are becoming more integrated and more powerful. Also, more advisory boards on search firms, which has been a welcome trend, I would say. The final thing I'd say is that search firm owners are becoming younger. Well, they're not they're certainly becoming younger as I'm getting older. A few years ago, they were all older than me. They now all seem to be younger than me. But in all seriousness, I think technology has brought in a younger demographic, and COVID has also meant that people have been retiring earlier, which is maybe a good thing for work-life balance. So that's it. Sorry to go through so quickly. Just want to say thank you again to the speakers, Steffi and Philip. Thank you to you for your time. We will be sending feedback. We'll be sending an email to get your feedback later, but please do comment and send us an email if there's particular topics you'd like us to cover in the future, sorry. We will be doing a CEO club. We'll be launching that, so it'd be good to get your kind of ideas in terms of that, in terms of your interest levels on that. And if you would like any consultations with any of us about any topics, we'd be very happy to do that online or in person. And we will be sharing a link to the recording as well when we send the follow-up email early next week, so you can pass that on to your colleagues or friends in your business or others. And please do mention us to those you know. Please do have a look at our little poll on LinkedIn after this sometime today if you get a chance to vote, because I think there's 1 or 2 more days to vote in terms of which direction you think the industry is going in for the second half of this year, whether you think it's going up, similar, or down in terms of revenue. And I think that's just about it. So again, sorry to whiz through that, but hopefully we covered a few subjects which you sort of interested you, and hopefully we can go into more detail with you at another time. And yeah, thanks again for joining. So I know you're incredibly busy people. And thanks again to Philip and Steffi, and look forward to speaking to some of you again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye.